Have you ever sat quietly in a room full of your own family and realized they had stopped seeing you? Not because they hated you, but because they believed your life was already behind you. That was me. Welcome to Prime Stories. My name is Martha, and for years my family thought I was just an old woman who spent her days knitting sweaters, drinking tea, and remembering the past. They had no idea that beneath my bedroom floor, I had been guarding a secret for more than 40 years. A secret that would one day decide whether my family kept their home or lost everything they had. But before I tell you what was inside that old metal box, you need to understand why I hid it in the first place. Because every dollar in that box carried a story. Every bill represented a sacrifice. And every sacrifice came from a promise I made to the man I loved. That promise changed my entire life. It was a cold Tuesday evening when everything began to fall apart. The rain had been beating against our windows since afternoon. I remember sitting in my old rocking chair by the fireplace, knitting a tiny blue sweater for my youngest great-grandson. The room smelled of coffee that had gone cold hours earlier. Normally, our house was filled with laughter. That night, it felt different. The walls themselves seemed heavy. I could hear my grandson David pacing across the dining room floor. Back and forth. Back and forth. Every step sounded heavier than the last. Then he slammed a stack of papers onto the table so hard that I nearly dropped my knitting needles. I can't do this anymore. His voice shook with frustration. I've called every bank in town. They all said no. I've asked every friend I have. They either can't help or they don't want to. His wife Sarah sat across from him with tears quietly rolling down her cheeks. She tried to smile for him. She really did. But you know something about pain? Sometimes it refuses to stay hidden. I don't know what else to do, she whispered. The mortgage company called again today. David covered his face with both hands. If we don't pay them by Friday. He couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I already knew. They would lose the house. The same house where birthdays had been celebrated. Where Christmas mornings had filled every room with laughter. The same house where my husband had taken his final breath. I looked around that room. Family photographs covered the walls. Pictures of graduations, weddings, babies taking their first steps. So many beautiful memories. And yet, no one looked at me. Not once. I don't blame them. When people see an old woman sitting quietly in the corner, they assume she's simply listening. They don't imagine she's thinking, or remembering, or carrying answers they haven't even thought to ask. I kept knitting. Click, click, click. The sound of those needles became the only thing breaking the silence between their worried voices. David suddenly stood up so quickly that his chair scraped across the wooden floor. I need air. Sarah grabbed his arm. It's pouring outside. I don't care. If I stay here another minute, I'm going to lose my mind. The front door slammed. Then came silence. Only the rain remained. Sarah lowered her head onto the table. For several minutes, she cried without making a sound. Watching someone you love cry is one of the hardest things in this world. Especially when you've lived long enough to know that some storms cannot be stopped, only survived. Finally, I placed my knitting on my lap. I looked at her and quietly asked, "Is it really that bad, sweetheart?" She raised her eyes toward me. For a moment, she looked like a frightened little girl instead of the strong woman she'd always tried to be. "We owe $92,000, she whispered. "If we can't pay almost half of it by Friday, they're taking the house." $92,000. The number didn't shock me. Life had taught me long ago that fortunes can disappear overnight. What mattered wasn't the number. It was the fear in her voice. I slowly nodded, because deep inside, I knew this day might come. My eyes drifted toward the hallway leading to my bedroom. Toward the room no one ever entered unless they were bringing me fresh towels or asking if I needed medicine. Hidden inside that room was something I had prayed my family would never need. Sarah noticed me staring. "What are you thinking, Grandma?" I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because memories had suddenly returned like old friends knocking at my door. "Oh," I answered softly, "just remembering a promise." She looked confused. She had no idea what I meant. How could she? I'd never told anyone. Not David. Not Sarah. Not even my own children while they were alive. Some promises are so sacred. They stay locked inside your heart for a lifetime. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I waited. The old grandfather clock struck midnight. Then one. Only when I was certain everyone was asleep, I slowly stood from my rocking chair. Every step hurt. Age has a funny way of reminding you that time never loses a race. I closed my bedroom door behind me, knelt beside an old cedar chest that had remained untouched for decades. My hands trembled as I lifted the false wooden bottom. There it was. An old rusted tin box wrapped in yellow newspaper that I hadn't opened it in years. That I gently brushed away the dust, held it against my chest, closed my eyes. I prayed they would never need you, whispered. Then, I opened the lid. The moment I looked inside, my heart nearly stopped. Someone had been there before me. Before I tell you what I found beneath that old tin box, let me take you back 40 years. Because that secret didn't begin with money. It began with love. The kind of love that survives empty pockets, long nights, and even death. That if you've ever loved someone so deeply that you'd spend the rest of your life keeping a promise to them, then you'll understand why I did what I did. 40 years earlier, my husband Thomas was lying in a hospital bed. He had always been the strongest man I knew. He built houses with his own hands. He fixed neighbors' fences without charging a penny. He carried our children on his shoulders even after working 12-hour shifts. To me, Thomas wasn't just my husband, he was home. But that day, the man who had once looked taller than every mountain suddenly looked so small beneath those white hospital blankets. The machines beside him beeped softly. Their rhythm reminded me that every second with him was precious. I squeezed his hand. It was still warm, still familiar, still the hand that had held mine on our wedding day. He smiled at me. You've been crying again. I forced a smile. No. He chuckled weakly. Martha, I've been married to you for 35 years. You were never good at lying. I laughed through my tears. Even then, he still knew me better than anyone. The doctor had already told us the truth. There wasn't much time left. But neither of us wanted to say those words aloud. Sometimes silence protects the heart better than honesty. Thomas looked toward the window. The sun was setting. Golden light spilled across the room. It's beautiful, he whispered. It reminds me of the evening I first saw you. I smiled. You were pretending to fix your truck. I wasn't pretending. You took 3 hours to tighten one bolt. Only because I was hoping you'd walk by again. I laughed. You've admitted that after all these years? I figured I don't have much left to lose. For a few minutes, we forgot the hospital, forgot the sickness, forgot the fear. We were simply two young people in love again. Then his smile slowly faded. Martha. His voice became serious. I need you to promise me something. My heart tightened that I already knew this wasn't going to be easy. I don't want promises, I whispered. I want you. He gently squeezed my hand. I know. But life doesn't always give us what we want. I lowered my head. A tear landed on our joined hands. If our family ever faces a day when they think they've lost everything. He paused to catch his breath. Don't let pride destroy them. I looked at him confused. What do you mean? He took a slow breath before answering. My father lost our home because he was too ashamed to ask for help. I watched my mother cry every night. I promised myself our family would never go through that. He reached toward the small wooden box on the bedside table. Inside was the old silver pocket watch his father had left him. It wasn't worth much money. But to Thomas, it was priceless. He placed it in my hands. Keep this. I shook my head immediately. No. It belongs to you. It belongs to us. He closed my fingers around it. And someday, if life becomes harder than you can bear, sell it. I stared at him in disbelief. No. I could never. He smiled gently. I'm not asking you to hold on to things. I'm asking you to hold on to people. Those words settled deep inside my heart. I'm serious, Martha. A house can be rebuilt. Money can be earned again. But family, he looked toward the hallway where our children had just walked out after visiting. Family is the only treasure that matters. I couldn't stop crying. I don't know how to live without you. He lifted his trembling hand and brushed away one of my tears. Yes, you do. You've been stronger than me since the day we met. I laughed softly. That's not true. Oh, it is. When we had nothing, you somehow made our children believe we had everything. When I lost my first job, you sold your favorite necklace and never told me. I only found out years later. You've always been the quiet hero of this family. I looked away that I had never thought of myself that way. I was simply doing what wives and mothers do. Thomas smiled once more. Promise me something else. What? Save a little. Whenever you can. $1. $5. Whatever life allows. It doesn't matter how long it takes. One day, our family might need a miracle. And miracles, he gently tapped my hand, are often built one small sacrifice at a time. I couldn't answer. My throat was too tight. So instead, I nodded. I promise. He smiled with such peace that it almost frightened me. That's my girl. Were the last words he ever spoke to me. The next morning, he was gone. 4 weeks after his funeral, the house felt unbearably quiet. Every chair reminded me of him. Every cup in the kitchen. Every tool in the garage. Grief has a strange way of filling every room. One afternoon, I picked up an old coffee can from the pantry. I placed a single $5 bill inside. Just $5. It wasn't much, but it was the beginning of a promise. Every week after that, if I saved a little on groceries, it went into the can. If I mended an old dress instead of buying a new one, the extra money went into the can. If I baked birthday cakes instead of ordering them, more money went into the can. Years turned into decades. $5 became 50. 50 became hundreds. Hundreds became thousands that no one ever noticed. And I never wanted them to, because I wasn't saving money that I was building the miracle Thomas had believed our family might one day need. And now, 40 years later, that day had finally arrived that I looked at the old tin box resting in my lap. Then my eyes drifted toward the silver pocket watch lying beneath it. I picked it up carefully. It had stopped ticking years ago. But somehow, holding it in my hands, I could still hear Thomas's voice. Miracles are built one small sacrifice at a time. I smiled through my tears. Tomorrow, my family would learn the truth. But first, there was one person I needed to speak to alone. David. Because before I handed him that money, he needed to hear the story behind every single dollar. Before I tell you what my grandson said when I placed that old tin box in front of him, there's something you should know. Money can save a house. But sometimes, a family needs something much greater than money. They need hope. That night, I wasn't worried about losing my savings. I was worried about losing David. Not physically, but the bright, kind-hearted young man I had watched grow up. The burden on his shoulders had become so heavy that I could see it stealing pieces of him every single day. A man can survive being poor. What destroys him is believing he's failed the people he loves. And that was exactly what David believed. I hardly slept that night. The old grandfather clock chimed every hour, but I never closed my eyes for more than a few minutes. I kept thinking about the little boy David used to be. He couldn't have been more than 6 years old when he climbed into my lap after falling off his bicycle. His knees were scraped. His face was covered in tears. "Grandma," he sobbed, "I'm never riding a bike again." I kissed the top of his head and smiled. "You know what happens every time a bird falls from its nest?" He sniffled and looked up at me. "What?" "It learns to fly." He frowned. "But it falls first." "Yes. And then it gets back up." I gently wiped the tears from his cheeks. The strongest wings are built after the hardest falls. The very next day, he climbed back onto that bicycle. By sunset, he was riding faster than any child on our street. Even then, I knew there was something special about him. He never quit. Until now. The next morning I woke before sunrise. Old habits never leave you. I made coffee, fried eggs, toasted fresh bread. The smell drifted through the house exactly as it had for decades. For a little while, everything felt normal. Then David walked into the kitchen. His shoulders were slumped. His beard had grown in unevenly. His eyes were red from another sleepless night. He looked older than his 42 years. "Morning, Grandma." He tried to smile. It barely reached his eyes. I poured him a cup of coffee. He wrapped both hands around the mug but didn't drink. After several minutes, he quietly said, "I don't know how I'm going to tell the kids." I looked at him. "Tell them what?" "That we're losing the house." His voice cracked. "I promised them we'd always have a home." He stared into his coffee. I lied. My heart broke. "No, sweetheart. You didn't lie. You believed what every father wants to believe. That he could protect his family." He shook his head. "I failed." "No. I did. I borrowed too much. I expanded the business when I shouldn't have. I thought I was giving everyone a better future. And said, I'm taking everything away." He covered his face with both hands. Then, to my surprise, he began to cry. Not the quiet tears of a man trying to stay strong. These were the tears he'd been holding back for months. I've learned something in nearly 8 decades of life. When a grown man cries, he's usually been hurting for a very long time. I reached across the table and rested my wrinkled hand on his. He looked up at me, ashamed. "I'm sorry, Grandma. I shouldn't be crying in front of you." I smiled gently. "Why not? Aren't grandmothers made for moments like this?" He laughed softly through his tears. For just a second, I saw the little boy who had once run into my arms after scraping his knees. Some things never truly change. I stood slowly. "My legs aren't what they used to be," I joked. "So you'll have to help me." He quickly stood. "Of course. I need you to come to my room." He looked puzzled. "Your room?" "Yes. There's something I've hidden from this family for a very long time." His eyebrows pulled together. "What do you mean?" I simply smiled. "You'll see." Together, we walked down the hallway. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because of my age, because I knew that once he saw what was inside my room, nothing between us would ever be the same again. I closed the bedroom door behind us. The morning sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, filling the room with a soft golden glow. David looked around curiously. "Grandma, what's going on?" Instead of answering, I knelt beside my old cedar chest. He rushed forward. "You don't have to do that. I've got it." "No," I said quietly. "This is something I need to do myself." Slowly, I lifted the false wooden bottom. David's eyes widened. I never knew that was there. Very few people did. I reached inside and carefully lifted out the old rusted tin box. Its corners were worn smooth by time. The faded newspaper around it had turned almost brown with age. I placed it on the bed between us. David stared at it in silence. "What's inside?" For a long moment, I couldn't answer, and said, I rested my hand on the lid. "This box," I whispered, "contains 40 years of keeping a promise." Then I slowly opened it. Envelope after envelope filled with neatly organized cash. David didn't move. He simply stared. His mouth slowly fell open. He blinked once, then again. Finally, he looked at me. "Grandma." His voice barely came out. "What is this?" I smiled through tears. "My life's work." He shook his head in disbelief. No, this can't be." He picked up one envelope with trembling hands. Then another. Then another. Every one of them was filled with carefully saved money. His breathing became uneven. How long have you been saving this?" "Since the day your grandfather died." He looked as though the world had stopped turning. 40 years. 40 years. And not one person in the family had known. But before I could explain why, David noticed something else inside the box. An old folded letter. He reached for it. "Who's this from?" I froze, because that letter was written by his father. The father he had lost far too young. And once David opened it, neither of us would ever be the same again. Before I tell you what happened when David opened that letter, I want you to think about someone you've lost. If you've ever wished you could hear their voice just one more time, just one more sentence, one more piece of advice, then you'll understand what happened that morning. Because although my son had been gone for 12 years, his words were about to walk back into our lives. And neither of us was prepared for it. David held the faded envelope in both hands. He turned it over once, then again. His fingers trembled as he traced the handwriting. For several seconds, he didn't say a word. I could see the recognition slowly spread across his face. His eyes filled with tears before he even opened it. He looked up at me. Dad. I nodded. Yes, he wrote that letter years before he passed away. David swallowed hard. Why didn't you ever tell me? I smiled sadly. Because it wasn't meant for you then. It was meant for the day our family truly needed hope. He lowered his eyes to the envelope again. I don't know if I can read it. I reached over and gently placed my hand on his shoulder. You can. And your father would want you to. For a long moment, the room was silent. Even the birds outside seemed to stop singing. Finally, David opened the envelope. The paper crackled softly as he unfolded it. His lips quivered. Then he began to read aloud. Mom, if you're reading this, then life has become harder than any of us hoped it ever would. David stopped. His voice cracked. He took a deep breath before continuing. I know you've spent years hiding this money. And I know why. You think no one notices the sacrifices you make. But I noticed every single one. David wiped his eyes. He looked at me. You never told anyone. I smiled gently. I never needed to. He nodded and continued reading. When I was 16, I watched you sew patches onto your winter coat instead of buying a new one. You told us you liked the old coat. I knew the truth. You were saving the money. Another tear rolled down David's cheek. When my sister wanted piano lessons, you secretly worked evenings cleaning Mrs. Henderson's house. You came home exhausted, but you still made dinner and helped us with homework. You never complained. You simply loved us. David lowered the letter. He covered his mouth with one hand. I never knew any of this. I laughed softly. You were only a little boy. There was no reason for you to know. He looked around my tiny bedroom, at the old furniture, the worn curtains, the repaired rocking chair. All these years, you never replaced anything. No. Didn't you ever want something for yourself? I smiled. I already had everything I wanted. My family. He looked back down at the letter. Mom. If I'm no longer here, please don't let David carry the weight of this family alone. He's stubborn. He gets that from me. Despite his tears, David laughed. That sounds like Dad. I smiled. It certainly does. He continued. One day he'll believe he has to solve every problem by himself. Don't let him. Remind him that families aren't built by one strong person. They're built when everyone carries a little of the load. David couldn't continue. He broke down completely. The letter slipped from his hands onto the bed. He buried his face in his palms. I'm sorry. He whispered between sobs. I'm so sorry. I wrapped my arms around him, just as I had done when he was 6 years old. Some people think grandmothers stop comforting their grandchildren once they grow up. They're wrong. No matter how old they become, a grandmother still sees the child she once held. After a few minutes, David looked up. His eyes were red. I failed him. No. I failed Dad. I failed you. You saved for 40 years. And I couldn't even keep the business alive. I gently shook my head. Listen to me carefully. He looked into my eyes. You did not fail. You tried. There's a difference. He said nothing, so I continued. Do you know how many times your grandfather failed? He looked surprised. Grandpa. I nodded. He lost 2 jobs before he started his own business. The first roof he ever built collapsed during a storm. He came home convinced everyone would laugh at him. David stared at me. I never knew that. Because he got back up. That's what strong people do. They don't avoid failure. They refuse to stay there. David looked at the tin box once more. Grandma, I can't take this. The words didn't surprise me. I knew you'd say that. It isn't right. This is your money. No. It's our family's future. I saved it for moments exactly like this. But what if you need it someday? I smiled. My dear, I'm 78 years old. I've already lived the life I prayed for. I've watched my children grow. My grandchildren build families. I've held my great-grandchildren in my arms. What more could I possibly save this money for? David couldn't answer. He simply cried. Then he did something that completely caught me by surprise. He slowly knelt in front of me, just like he used to when he was a little boy asking for a bedtime story. He took both of my hands, and through tears he whispered, "I don't think I've ever thanked you for everything you've done." My heart melted. "You don't owe me thanks. Being your grandmother has been the greatest gift of my life." He shook his head. "No. I've spent years rushing through life. I thought success meant earning more money, buying a bigger house, growing my business. But sitting here, I finally understand what wealth really looks like." I smiled. "And what does it look like?" He looked straight into my eyes. "It looks like you." Those words were worth more than every dollar inside that old tin box. But before either of us could say another word, Sarah knocked gently on my bedroom door. "David." "Grandma." "There's someone at the front door." David frowned. "We're not expecting anyone." Sarah's face had turned pale. She looked terrified. "The bank. They're here." My heart skipped a beat. They had arrived. 1 full day earlier than expected. And this time, they weren't coming to make another phone call. They had come to take our home. Before I tell you what happened when the bank officers stepped onto our porch, let me tell you something I've learned after 78 years of life. The hardest moments rarely announce themselves. They simply knock on your front door. And in just a few seconds, everything changes. That morning, as Sarah stood in my bedroom doorway with fear written all over her face, I knew that moment had finally arrived. The moment Thomas had warned me about 40 years ago. The moment I had spent a lifetime preparing for. David quickly wiped the tears from his face. "They're early," he whispered. "They weren't supposed to come until tomorrow." Sarah's hands were shaking. "They said they need to discuss the foreclosure." No one spoke. The room suddenly felt smaller. Even the air seemed heavy. David looked at the old tin box on my bed, then back at me. "Grandma, what do we do?" I gently closed the lid of the box. "We tell the truth." He frowned. "What truth?" "That no family should lose hope while they're still standing together." He gave me a weak smile. Even then, he was still trying to protect me. "I don't want you involved in this." I chuckled softly. "My dear, I've been involved since before you were born." Together we walked toward the front door. Each step echoed through the hallway. Family photographs lined the walls. I paused for just a second. There was Thomas, smiling in his old work clothes. There was my son Michael, holding little David on his shoulders. There were Christmas mornings, birthday candles, school graduations, an entire lifetime framed on those walls. I silently prayed, "Lord, please don't let strangers take away the home that holds all these memories." David opened the front door. 2 men in dark suits stood outside. One carried a leather briefcase. The other held several folders. Both wore polite expressions, but I could tell they had delivered difficult news many times before. "Mr. David Carter?" one of them asked. "Yes. I'm Richard Evans from the mortgage department. I believe you know why we're here." David nodded slowly. "Please come in." They stepped inside. Sarah quietly offered them coffee. Both declined. No one was there for small talk. Richard opened his folder. "I'm afraid your account has reached the final stage of foreclosure proceedings." His words were calm, professional, but every sentence felt like another brick falling onto David's shoulders. "If payment cannot be arranged immediately, we'll have no choice but to begin legal possession of the property." Sarah lowered her head. I could hear her quietly crying. David took a deep breath. "I understand." Then something happened that nearly broke my heart. He looked at the officers and said, "I don't blame you. You're only doing your job." Richard hesitated. For the first time, his professional expression softened. "I truly am sorry. I know this isn't easy." David gave a tired smile. "It isn't." He reached for the papers on the table. His hand was trembling so badly. He could barely hold the pen he was actually preparing to sign. Preparing to surrender the home where generations of our family had laughed, celebrated, and grieved together. I couldn't watch another second. "David." My voice was quiet, but everyone turned toward me. He looked confused. "Yes, Grandma." "Put the pen down." He stared at me. "What?" I said. Put the pen down. The room became completely silent. Even the bank officers looked at me. I slowly stepped forward, carrying the old rusted tin box in both hands. Richard glanced at it, puzzled. What is that? I smiled gently. My husband's promise. No one understood. Not yet. I placed the box on the dining table. Its old metal lid made a soft clink against the wood. David looked at me with worried eyes. Grandma. I nodded. It's time. Slowly, I opened the lid. One by one, I removed the envelopes. The officers exchanged confused glances. Sarah covered her mouth. David stood frozen. I carefully stacked the envelopes on the table. 20, 50, more than anyone had imagined. Richard's eyes widened. Ma'am, what exactly is this? I smiled through tears. 40 years. He blinked. I'm sorry. 40 years of saving. I began opening the envelopes. Stacks of neatly organized bills covered the table. The room fell completely silent. David looked like he had forgotten how to breathe. Sarah burst into tears. Richard removed his glasses. Even his younger colleagues stood speechless. I pushed the money gently toward them. This should cover everything we owe. Richard looked down at the stacks. He quickly began calculating. Again. And again. Finally, he slowly looked up at me. Mrs. Carter, not only will this stop the foreclosure. He paused. His voice had changed. There is enough here to pay off the entire remaining mortgage. No one moved. For several seconds, the only sound in the room was Sarah crying. David stared at me in complete disbelief. Then he whispered, You saved our home. I smiled and gently shook my head. No, sweetheart. Your grandfather did. He looked confused. I picked up Thomas's silver pocket watch and placed it in David's hand. He believed that one day our family might need a miracle. I simply spent 40 years building it. David broke down. He wrapped his arms around me and held me tighter than he ever had before. I'm sorry, Grandma, he cried. I'm sorry I never saw how much you gave up for us. I stroked his hair, just as I had when he was a little boy. Oh, David, you were never supposed to see it. Love isn't something you keep score of. It's something you give freely. Even Richard quietly wiped a tear from his eye. In all his years working for the bank, he later admitted he had never witnessed anything like that morning. But what happened next was something I never could have imagined. Just as the paperwork was being completed, Richard looked at David and asked a question that would change our family's future forever. Mr. Carter, would you consider telling me why your business failed? None of us realized it then. But that single question would open a door that none of us had seen coming. A door that would prove my husband had been right all along. Sometimes losing everything is exactly what leads you to something even greater. Before I tell you how this story ends, I want to ask you something. Have you ever spent years doing something for the people you love, without expecting a single thank you? Do you have? Then you already know the greatest reward isn't hearing the words. It's seeing the people you love stand back up after they've fallen. That was all I had ever wanted. I didn't save that money so anyone would call me a hero. I saved it because 40 years earlier I had made a promise. And that promise had finally been fulfilled. The dining room remained silent. No one seemed to know what to say. The stacks of money were still spread across the table. The foreclosure papers lay untouched beside them. Richard, the senior bank officer, slowly closed his folder. Then, instead of standing up to leave, he looked at David. I hope you don't mind me asking something. David wiped his eyes. Go ahead. Richard folded his hands. You mentioned your business collapsed. What happened? David let out a long sigh. I own a small custom furniture company. At least, I used to. For years, everything was going well. We hired more workers, bought better equipment, took on bigger contracts. I thought the business would keep growing forever. He gave a bitter smile. Then 2 of our largest clients canceled within the same month. The economy slowed. Materials became more expensive. Orders stopped coming in. I borrowed money to keep paying my employees. I thought things would turn around. They didn't. I lost almost everything. Richard listened without interrupting. When David finished, he nodded slowly. I've seen many situations like yours. David looked down. I know. I made mistakes. Richard surprised all of us. No. You made business decisions during difficult circumstances. There's a difference. David looked up. For what it's worth. Richard continued. I have a brother. He owns a regional furniture company. He's been looking for someone experienced to manage a new production facility. David blinked. I'm sorry. Richard smiled. I can't promise anything. But I can make a phone call. The room fell silent again. Sarah stared at Richard in disbelief. Why would you do that? He looked toward me, then back at David. Because after what I've witnessed today, I'd like to believe good families deserve another chance. I quietly thanked God. Sometimes blessings arrive through people you'd never expect. Within a week, Richard's brother called. David went for an interview. He was nervous. His confidence had been shattered by everything that had happened. Before he left, he stopped by my room. Grandma, what if I fail again? I smiled. Do you remember learning to ride your bicycle? He laughed softly. I'll never forget. What did I tell you? He smiled. The strongest wings are built after the hardest falls. I nodded. Then go fly. He hugged me. I love you. I love you more. 3 days later, he came home carrying flowers. His smile reached his eyes for the first time in months. I got the job. Sarah threw her arms around him. The children began cheering. I simply closed my eyes and whispered, Thank you, Thomas. I could almost hear him saying, I told you we'd be all right. Months passed. Life slowly found its rhythm again. David worked hard. The company grew. Little by little, they rebuilt their savings. Not because they feared losing everything again, but because they had finally understood something important. Security isn't built overnight. It's built one small step at a time. Just as Thomas had always believed. One Sunday afternoon, the whole family gathered for dinner. There were children running through the backyard. The smell of fresh bread filled the kitchen. Laughter echoed through every room. As I watched them, I realized the house sounded alive again. After dessert, David stood up and tapped his glass with a spoon. I'd like everyone's attention. The room became quiet. He walked over to me, holding a small wooden box. Grandma, I know you'll probably tell me this isn't necessary. But today, I need to say something. He turned toward the family. When I was losing everything, I thought money was what would save us. I was wrong. He looked at me. What saved us was 40 years of love. My eyes filled with tears. He opened the wooden box. Inside was a beautiful silver key. We've done something. I looked at him confused. What is this? Sarah smiled. We had a duplicate made. A duplicate? David nodded. This house has always been yours too. But we wanted to make it official. He placed the key in my hand. No matter what happens, you will always have a home here. I laughed through my tears. You silly boy. I already knew that. He smiled. I know. But we needed you to hear it. Then my great-granddaughter, little Emma, walked over holding a folded piece of paper. I made this for you, great-grandma. I unfolded it carefully. It was a child's drawing. Our family standing together in front of a house. Above it, written in colorful crayons, were the words, Home is wherever Grandma is. I couldn't stop crying. Not because of the picture, but because children always tell the truth in the simplest ways. To them, I wasn't the woman who saved the house. I was simply Grandma, and that was the greatest title I had ever earned. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone on the front porch. The sun was setting, just like it had the day Thomas made me that promise in the hospital. I took his old silver pocket watch from my pocket. It still didn't work. It hadn't ticked in years. Yet somehow, it had never stopped reminding me what truly matters. I looked toward the sky and smiled. We did it, Thomas. We kept our promise. A gentle breeze rustled the trees. For just a moment, I could almost feel him sitting beside me. Some people leave this world, but love never does. Love stays in old houses, in family recipes, in faded photographs, in bedtime stories, and sometimes, in a little rusted tin box hidden beneath the floor for 40 years. If this story teaches you anything, I hope it's this. Never underestimate the quiet sacrifices of the people who love you. The strongest people are often the ones who speak the least. The richest people aren't always the ones with the biggest bank accounts. They're the ones whose lives are filled with love, generosity, and family. Because in the end, money can buy a house, but only love can build a home. Thank you for listening to my story. And if you're lucky enough to still have your parents or grandparents with you, don't wait until tomorrow. Give them a hug today. You never know how many silent sacrifices they've made just so you could smile.